So good morning everyone and welcome to Delicious Art Class today. Our subject today is this hairy little emu. I thought he'd be quite fun to paint. Animals is one of our favourite subjects and we've got lots of beautiful textures in here. So we've got this gorgeous hard metallic looking beak and then all the scruffy hair and the rough bits. So it's going to be a nice class with a good combination of smooth and rough kind of textures with the pastels. So we get to have a bit of a play. The first part of the class is a black and white sketch with charcoal. So if you have an art diary or some drawing paper, that's what you're going to need for the first 15 or so minutes. The reason we do that is just to have a little practice run. So it's like a rehearsal of the main picture. And we do that in something like this. So this is my little art diary. And I find that handy because I can keep it all in one place. And they're just samples of our little sketches that we do each class before we do the pastel. So they're nice to keep handy. It's also a good practice run just to get familiar with our picture. Then we will move on and start the pastel version of today. And my goal for every class is to get finished at the end of the class. Well, finished enough that you feel pretty happy with it, and maybe you can spend a little bit more time doing homework if you need to. All right, I'm just going to share my screen now so you'll won't see my face anymore, and we'll move over to my desk. And that's where I'll be doing my artwork, and you'll be able to see that as I talk us through it. So I've just got to get my little iPad happening here. I have this suspended over my table, so it's quite easy to see. So just getting that all working. Awesome, there we are. Lovely. And now you can see my table. So that's my notebook. I'm just adjusting the focus. There we go. So that's nice and clear now, and that should stay nice and still. So as I said, we do the first part of this in charcoal. If you have your little note handy, I like to kind of prop it up in front of me so I can see the picture quite easily without having to move my head too much. So I usually just fold it in half like this and then sit it up in front of my screen so I can just glance at it quickly and see it easily. So what I'm going to do now is grab my charcoal. I like to use willow charcoal for this little exercise because it's quite soft and I can push it around with my fingers, and you know it's not as black as compressed charcoal, but it is quite lovely and soft to use. And I like to use a couple of different sizes of charcoal. This one, the long thin one, is really helpful for doing just your line drawings and things like hair and small marks. And then this one is really nice for smudging colour in and kind of pushing it around. And it's the same kind of theory that we use with pastels. So first I'm going to draw up a kind of what we call a thumbnail area in about the same shape as the picture that we're going to do today. So it's a landscape picture. It doesn't have to be exactly the same size as the one on your drawing. You might want on your page, you might want to do something smaller. You might want to make it fit the entire page. That's up to you. I like to leave a bit of space down the side to make some notes or do my little colour swatches and things later on. And you can see on the colour picture there, I've actually put a grid line on. So what that means is I've divided that little picture into 4 parts. So we've got a halfway mark down the middle and then a halfway mark across the centre. And that will actually help us to determine where to put the drawing and where to put everything so that everything fits well. So what I like to do is once I've got my grid mark in, look at the picture and figure out where things are in each quarter. And if you just break your picture down into pieces like that, and you can actually make them into bigger pieces if that works for you, but it really helps you to just figure out where everything sits without letting the whole picture kind of overwhelm you, I guess. So if you look at the beak, I'm going to start in the bottom left corner. If you look at where the beak hits that line, so that center line there that we've got, the grid mark, where the beak crosses over that line. I'm just looking at the outline of it. And then the shape of the beak, how that comes down through here. And I'm just drawing lightly so that if I muck it up, I can get it off fairly easily. And then it kind of comes across like that. So that's the basic outline of the beak. And that's, you know, a good amount of information that's going to help me place that in the right spot in relation to the whole picture. While I'm here, I can look at the lovely nostril there on the beak, and I can mark in where that sits as well. So that sits about there. So you don't have to get too detailed or too into, you know, the whole thing just yet. All we're doing is really marking out where things sit. So if you want to then come into this other quarter, so the bottom right-hand quarter, continue the line of the beak up, and it comes to, looking at your picture. So if I look here at my picture, I can see that this end of the beak here comes to probably nearly halfway across that line. So I'd say just inside of halfway. So if that's halfway, I'm going to bring it to about there. So I'm going to bring my beak to there. It doesn't quite meet the line. It sort of sits just below it. But that's around about where it sits in relation to my grid line. I hope that makes sense. So kind of sits like that. And then I'm going to look at the side of the neck. So the side of the neck of this guy kind of runs down, not straight. It's got a little bit of a bump in it, but it sits at about a third of the way in from the right-hand side. So about there, I would say. So that's the side of the neck. And you can see there's this lovely triangular shadow shape. Can you see that there? So the side of the neck is quite light, and then where it goes underneath the beak is quite dark. So we can shade all that in after. Okay, and then I'm going to come up this side now. Because we've got all this hair and fur and feathers and things on this guy, I guess you call it feathers, it's sort of all fuzzy around the edges. You can't, it's got like lost edges, they're called. So they're sort of edges that wander off into the background, and they're not very defined. There's no really hard lines. There's nothing very definite. It's kind of all soft and fuzzy. So I'm just going to do this sort of soft, fuzzy shape around the side of the head there. All right. I don't want a hard line because then that's going to be too defined. So if you just kind of do a soft kind of shape around the head there and bring that up so that it sits inside that top right-hand quarter where it needs to be in relation to your halfway lines, etc. Yeah. So we'll stay in this quarter for a moment. And the main feature in this part is the eye. So let's have a look at where the eye sits. If I find my halfway mark, and you can put more grid lines onto your picture if you want to, then the eye sits closer to the left-hand side of this quarter. I'm just going to lightly draw that in. Doesn't quite come down to that halfway mark across the middle there, so it sits just above there. And it's quite dark, isn't it? So we can't see a lot of detail in the eye, but it's really big. So I'm going to say it sits around about there. We're just putting things in where they need to be at this point. Don't worry too much about the shadows and things just yet. Okay, so that's the main kind of information we need to have inside the that quarter there. Continue the beak up a little way through there. And then moving over onto the left-hand top quarter, again, we've got a really fuzzy sort of outline around the head, and it starts at the top of the page. So it bleeds off to the top of the page, so you can't see the actual top of his head. And then it kind of comes across and then dips in around where the cheek and the neck beak are. So we have this lovely soft kind of fuzzy edge there. And then, of course, oh, I forgot to put the fuzzy neck line in down here under the beak too. So just here on that center line, it's a lovely soft line there. So that's pretty much the basic shape that you need to start with. And we'll do this again when we start with pastels, and then we'll start to block it all in with color, etc. So now I've got my basic shapes in there, I want to pick up my shorter piece of charcoal and literally lie that down on my paper. What I'm looking at is this dark area here under the beak on the neck, and I just want to darken that off. And I'll find it much easier if I use the charcoal on its side, a short fatter piece, and if I rub that around like that, it gives me a really nice coverage without being too strong. And it's a sort of a softer line because I'm using the side of the stick rather than the end of it, which is more sharp and more defined. Okay, so you just push that around. I'm getting some funny little marks on there, probably from my paper and or the shape of the stick. Not too concerned though, I just really want to be looking at the tones. And to do that, look at your black and white version. So I've given you a black and white picture there too. And when you look at that, you can see very clearly how much darker it is underneath the beak as opposed to on top of the beak. So you can really find your lights and your darks quite easily using that black and white picture. So the beak is the highlight. It's just got all this gorgeous light, which is nearly silver, popping off it. And then everything else is kind of dark around it with a few little light bits here and there. So looking at black and white version will really help to see where you need to darken things off. So if you've darkened off underneath the beak here, you'll see the edge of the beak. You can now use the end of your charcoal stick to get a hard line. And so that's quite defined, isn't it? We've got quite a dark line around there. So I'm just looking at the beak at the moment, and we can colour in or fill in the nostril. And then noticing that ridge down the middle of the beak there. So it's got a definite shape down through there, that little line. And that's kind of the light section of the beak there. So on the left-hand side of that, it's quite dark also, or darker. So you can darken that off in here. Again, I'm just using the side of my charcoal just to get a softer kind of mark. All right. And then notice too that just on that left-hand side of the beak, where the hair or the feathers are, that wispy stuff there is darker than the beak when you look at your black and white picture. It's actually darker in tone. So you could put a bit of that in there now and just press a little bit harder with your charcoal to get a blacker kind of mark. Okay. So that's darker than the beak. These are the things you want to notice is what are the tones doing, because it'll help you choose your colours for your pastel version, but it also gives you some awareness around lights and darks and tones and stuff. And they're the things that make a painting interesting, I think, is what, where you get your lightest lights and your darkest darks, and it creates drama and interest. Okay, so there's a few ranges, and just back into this beak area, there's a few little, areas where it's sort of darker and lighter, so it's quite bumpy. There's a lot of texture in there, and that's going to be super fun to do. I'm just marking in some of the little dark sections there. What I want to do is try and leave the light or white area uncovered, so use your paper as your white. All right. So just kind of running around that, looking at the beak, seeing that we've got another little hole here in the nostril. So it's like a triangular shaped hole just there. That dips down and goes dark as well. And then as you come up towards the face, we're getting a few little hairy bits on the beak there. Okay, so can you see how that's starting to come alive now? Just by blocking in those dark and light areas and varying the tones. So noticing the tones and varying how dark and how light different parts are. Cool, cool. Darken off under here as well a little bit more. There we go. And so we have on the left hand side there, we have a little eye. Kind of didn't really see that before, but it's just this little tiny bulge just there. And it's quite dark too, isn't it? So we can darken that off through there. And then all of the top of the head is a sort of a mid-tone grey. So what I'm going to do is just gently kind of block all that in, because it's darker than the beak. So the beak is the brightest bit and the side of the neck where the light's hitting it. Everything else is sort of a mid to dark tone. So what we want to do is get a bit of a mid-tone down first. So if you use your short fat stick of charcoal just to get that lovely grey tone happening on there. I'm getting funny little stripes in there from this stick. You'll find different charcoals will do different things and have different effects. Okay, so now I've got an underpainting pretty much of mid-tones, and now you've got that going on, then it's time to pick up your longer stick, because now we want to start to do some of these furry bits. So over that little eye on the left-hand side, it's almost like there's sort of eyelashes there. And so you can just do some short little wispy eyelash kind of shapes. And then this is, I just did a grass class actually the other day with my beginner students. And this is a similar process to the grass, isn't it? Because you've got to build up the thickness of the hair or feathers on the head here. And what we've got to be aware of is that there's grass, you know, I'm going to call it grass now, feathers behind other ones. So it's about building up the density or the thickness of those feathers. And then as they come closer to us, or forward, I should say, onto the front of the beak there, they get much darker. So this is where you can start to vary the pressure with your charcoal. And you can see I'm pressing a bit harder there, so it's getting to be making a darker mark. See how that's gotten darker? And it's just about pressure. It's just about how hard I pressed. And so because I've already put all this fur in, or hair up the back here, around the head area, I'll come around that eye in a minute. And now I can come kind of do some more shorter pieces of feathers in the foreground, but pressing a little bit firmer so that I'm just getting a few little darker hairs happening. So that's how you kind of build up the thickness and the lushness of those feathers. There we go. Nice. So that's pretty much all I want to get done on that part of the emu. Let's move over to this eye area. And again, remembering around this back section here behind the eye, we've got a fair bit of fuzz there, but it's sort of softened, isn't it? It's much softer, fuzzier, blurred, I guess. It's probably photography, but we'll keep it quite soft, because that way it's sending this all back into the distance a little bit. And when we make the hair or the fur in the foreground harder and sharper, that brings it closer to us. So we're getting a sense of perspective and distance. All right, so I'm just going to keep that soft back there. What I'm doing to keep that soft is just lying my charcoal stick on the paper, but just pressing quite lightly. So I don't want it to be too defined. And we've got some sort of hair just down the back of the neck there too, as it runs down off the page. It's very soft and blurred. And probably that hard line I drew in there before isn't helping terribly much. I might soften that off a little bit. Kneadable eraser, wonderful things if you haven't tried those before. So they pull apart like a blue tack. You can smudge things with them. You can get marks off with them. Great for pastels, great for charcoal. If you want to get some white back in here, you might have put some too much charcoal down and you want to get the white back in, you can use your kneadable eraser. You'll need to keep kneading it, that's the only catch, to find a clean spot, because what these erasers do is they pick up pigment or colour off the paper and hang on to it basically, so it kind of sticks to the eraser. So then if you want to find a clean side and you don't want to put that dark charcoal back down onto your page, you need to keep kneading it basically until you find a clean bit. See, they get quite dirty, so then you just knead it again. Eventually they get filthy and you've got to throw them away, but I can get a pretty good amount of time out of one eraser, and that's just a small bit. So you can pull pieces off, and they're also really good for keeping your fingers clean. So while you're painting with pastels, you might be kind of doing a bit of a stress ball thing with the other hand, and it's good to get the pastel off your fingers and keep them cleanish. So kneadable eraser is your friend. Wonderful things, and they're only about $2, so they're not stupid expensive, which is great. Just softening off some of the hair around the neck here and blurring that off. Remember, it's lighter on that right hand side because it's catching the light. The sun must be coming from that side there, so that's always a good thing to be aware of too, is where's the sun, what direction is the sun coming in, and that way you can figure out where shadows and things should be. So I'm saying the sun's coming from there because we've got this beautiful light hitting the side of the neck, and we've also got light mostly on the right hand side of the beak because it's closer to the sun. The left hand side of the beak that we talked about before is a little bit darker because it's turned away and it's in shadow. Okay, cool. All right, so I've done all this fuzzy stuff around here. Let's pop the eye in there. So eyes are always the first thing we see when we look at faces, whether it's an animal or a person. We're drawn to the eyes. So it's important to take note of the shape of the eye and make sure that you get that right, because different shaped eyes are very often unique to the animal or creature that has them. So in this instance, it's a bird's eye. We've got quite a lot of black around the outside of it, and there's kind of a little bit of light just on the inside there of the eyelid too. So I'm going to use my eraser just to show you where that is. So just in here, and that'll become more obvious when we do the inside of the eye. So as I said, we're not going to spend a whole bunch of time getting the detail done at this point. We just want to get familiar with the picture. Okay, so I've got the basic shape of the eye in. I'm just going to darken that off now because it's quite a dark tone. If you look at your black and white version, you'll see that it's quite black in there. Okay, I know it's brown, but in the grayscale, it looks really black. So we can darken off that eye, which gives us that lovely effect that we want. Now you can see the pupil. I can just see the pupil. I've got it here on my iPad, so it's a bit easier to see. The pupil's about here. It's going to be hard to make that darker than what we've already made the eyeball bit. So I'm going to lighten that off a tiny bit just so I can get my pupil in there. So this is what you've got to kind of think about when you're looking at tone. How do I get that dark pupil to look, darker than the eye if the eye's already really dark? So you've got to have a bit of a play with your tones, and that just is it's really good practice to notice those things. Cool. And then of course the outside of the eye is really dark, so you can darken that off again. As I said earlier, you won't get really, really, really black with willow charcoal because it's just so soft. You just won't go super black. But for this exercise, it's fine. Okay. And then, as I said earlier, there's a little bit of white or light. I'm going to cover the front of that up in a minute with eyelashes. But on this section here, you can see there's a little bit of light. So I'm just taking some of that off with my eraser to show you where I mean. And that's lovely to put a bit of light around an eye like that, because it's telling us again the direction of the light, but it's also giving it form. Okay. And then we have quite a lot of information down around the front of the eye there, so we can get more into that in the colour version, but just study that and be aware of what's happening in there, of the shapes and the colours. And there's a funny little wrinkly bit here at the top of the beak. Looks like a bit of loose bark or something sitting there. Okay, so all those little details. Now he's looking a bit cranky. So what we want to do is soften the eye off a bit and bring those eyelashes kind of over the top of it. So we're going to soften that off. And across the top of this eye, we've got some little short lashes, but they all kind of go in an arc. Why isn't this charcoal working? They kind of go in a little arc. It's really strange. We'll get another bit. All right, try this one, that's better. So if you, again, press fairly hard with your charcoal to make darker marks, and we'll just build up that little section of eyelashes around this eye. Like that. So we kind of want to overlap it a little bit. And you can see there's also some little light sections in those feathers around there too. And so if you wanted to, you could use your eraser to just put a few little light ones in, particularly over the front of the eye there, because it's quite dark. You can't really see, you know, the darkest eyelashes, but we can lighten some up. So what I've got is my eraser. I've just made a little knife edge shape with my fingers, and I can draw with that now. I can just draw little lines, and they don't have to be really big, just very fine. So you can make a really fine little edge with the eraser and just do these little wispy sort of marks, and that'll help you get the light back in there. I feel like my eye needs to be a bit darker than I've made it. I'll darken that up some more. Kind of gets lost in the distance a little bit. If you use compressed charcoal, you'll find you'll get that to be much blacker. So that's pretty much our little guy for this part anyway. The shape of the eye isn't quite right, but I know now where everything kind of needs to be in relation to my grid lines and how it's all going to sit. So now we've got this bit done, we can move on and do it in colour and have a bit of confidence about, you know, how we're going to do it, and having a little rehearsal is a great thing because you're sort of familiar with it now, so we can do it again second time round. And I love that, because if I muck it up this go, I know I've got another chance to get it right or fix it. So it just gives you awareness as well, you know, of what to do and where to put it and all that sort of thing. I think my beak's gone a bit fat there. Never mind. Another thing to be aware of, isn't it? There we go. So you can continue with this. I mean, charcoal's beautiful to work with. If you feel like just doing charcoal work, there's some fun whiskers around the beak here. Didn't see those. So when I'm looking at something like this and I'm getting to the end of it, I'll start to look for the little light bits just before we move on. And again, get the eraser and start to just put a few little light hairs or feathers back in through here. Again, that just helps you talk about where the light is, create some lovely tone and a lot more body and texture and context. So that's that guy for now. Yeah, it's all right. I think there's a bit too much business going on over here. So again, you know, the erasers are great if you want to rely on those to take things out and lighten things up. Charcoal's beautiful to work with. Don't ever underestimate charcoal. It's just delightful. So you can sort of soften off a bit of the beak and then find the really light bits, for instance, right down here on that front right section. It's really light. So that would be one of the lightest sections on there. And there's a little bit across the right side there. Everything else is kind of a bit greyed off or different tones. We've got a white kind of light mark down through there. So you can just study the shapes in the beak as well, and you know, notice where it gets dark and where it gets light, and how can you, you know, how can you make that work? I feel like my beak's too wide. Something's not quite right there. All right, that's better. So we'll move on to do the colour one now, and call this a little practice run. Always fun to practice, I think. Cool, lovely. So next thing we want to look at when we are looking at doing the colour version is the colours in the picture. So I did say on the notes there that when you're choosing your paper, that a good paper colour would be a purple, mid-grey or a green. The reason I thought green would be nice is because there's green in the background of the picture. So obviously this photo is taken outdoors, and you know, if there's grass or something there behind it. If you want to leave your paper unpainted or unfilled and just draw the emu on whatever colour paper you want, that's a great option too. Sometimes that's easier. It just depends on your preference. So for today, we will leave the background undone, but if you choose to go back in afterwards and fill it in and turn it into something, that's cool. All right, so what I've got here today is, I didn't have a green sheet. I would have liked a green sheet of paper for this actually. And my mid colour is this blue, so I thought I'll go with blue. I think these colours will look quite nice on a blue background, and if not, I can fix it later and add something else and throw some green down. I did pick out some green pastels for that purpose, so maybe, you know, we'll see how we go. Might change our minds halfway through. You know that often happens. So what I have is my reference photo, so I'll pop that back where I can see it again. And I've got my little board, so it's good to have a little hard board like this, timber board. You can see mine is well used. And then you want to have your bit of paper. So this is a colour fixed pastel paper, quite gritty, so it's a bit scratchy like a sandpaper, and it's a lovely texture for pastels because the pastels stick to it really nicely, and you can get some blending and stuff happening. So it's my favourite paper to use for classes, and it's reasonably affordable. I find I've used what did we have last week? Pastel matte. That's quite expensive, so I'd save that kind of paper for my good stuff. But this is great because you can actually paint on this, and if you don't like it, just get a brush and some water, wash it all in, and start again basically. So this paper will take a little bit of water, and it's a great way to reuse, you know, class paintings that you're not particularly want to keep or like very much. I have many of those. All right, so what I'm going to do now is tape my paper down. When you do that, make sure that you just stick your tape to your tablecloth or your clothing first, because what can happen with this paper is it can rip when you take the tape off afterwards. So stick it onto something else first, just to get a bit of that adhesive off. Masking tape is also a good option. So if you don't have this blue stuff, masking tape is really good. This is called 14-day tape, I think. That's what painters use when they're painting skirting boards and stuff like that. And it's a lovely tape, but as I said, it can tear your paper. So I always stick it to my clothing first before I put it on my paper. Taping it all the way around is a good option, because that way it stays nice and still on your little board. You don't have to hold it down. And if you did it all the way around, you could have a nice tidy border if you were filling the whole thing in. So I'm just going to use the tape top and bottom today. As long as it's taped down somehow, then that's a good thing. Cool. Next thing we want to do is put the grid mark back on. So you can use either charcoal or a pastel pencil to do that. Don't ever use graphite or a lead pencil, because it won't come off. It's a bugger to get off this paper. So I'm using charcoal, and I'm going to just draw very lightly my little grid lines. So halfway down and halfway across. Just helps to get the drawing in the right place. Charcoal is also very easy to get off afterwards if you need to take it off with your kneadable eraser, as long as you press nice and light. So try not to press too hard. So just find your halfway marks. These sheets are 23 by 30, so 15 is half of 30 and 11 and a half is half of 23. So they're your halfway marks. And that's pretty much all you need to do, is just draw or rule your lines on like that. Cool. And then it'll be the same process of just lightly drawing in those very basic shapes so that we can then start to build up with the colours. So I'm going to do that first, and then we'll have a look at some pastel colours and decide what we're going to use. And we'll have a little break, and then we'll come back and get stuck into it. Okay, so just looking at this again, we've already done it once, so we can kind of figure out where the shapes go to. How far down on the page does that beak go down? Maybe I needed to make it longer last time. That might be why it's a little bit off. You know, the distance from the edge of the page to the tip of the beak, the distance from across to that midline where the beak crosses that line and goes into the other quarter is about halfway down. So, yep, I need to go lower. So just doing that kind of thing in your mind as you're drawing it will help you get everything in the right place. So it needs to cross over about there. Okay, and then we've got quite an interesting shape on that beak. So the tip of the beak is kind of deep and it has this dark colour. And then it comes across into the other quarter and heads up to about there. So it's quite big, takes up a lot of space. Sorry, my dog's under the table and she's decided that I don't need my footstool and she pushed it away. So I had to go and get it back. Okay, now we can put the little nostril in here. And the other little nostril, that's just roughly, you don't have to put them in exactly just yet. We'll end up sort of filling in most of this, so you'll lose a lot of this information if you put too much in now. Okay, and then the fuzzy edges, noticing where the little eye is on that left side. So it's just a small, ellipse shape there. But how high up does that sit in relation to your halfway mark? And then your eyelashes. How much of the space, does the head of the emu take up in each quarter? So noticing that. And a good way to find that is to look at the negative space. So if you can't kind of get the shape of the head right, look at the shape of the area around it or the background around it. And that's really going to help you find the edges of things. So sometimes it's difficult to see the shape of something, but if you look at the negative space or the shape of the background around it, it really helps. So I've pretty much just very lightly drawn, loosely shaped around here. Don't put a hard line around the top of the head where all the soft feathers are, because it's going to be harder to cover up or lose later on. Unless you fill the background in, then you'll be able to do it. So just do soft sort of marks just to give yourself a bit of a guide as to where everything needs to be. Okay. And so they're pretty much the basic shapes. We've just got to get the eye area in there. And again, looking at where does the eye sit in relation to my grid? What's the shape of the eye? So it's kind of not quite flat across the top, but it's flatter across the top and then goes down and then up. So it's sort of like an oval shape almost. So the main thing is to figure out where that is in relation to everything else. I think I've not made it quite big enough. I'm just going to check that. So it looks like it comes up as high as halfway into this grid line here. And halfway line's about there. Yeah, it's much bigger than I had. And if you want to do something quirky, like Lynn was talking about, maybe using some fun colours in this guy, you could, to make it even more fun, you can make the eye bigger. Just if you want to have it a little bit different and a bit quirky. If that's your style of art, you can always put pinks and purples and yellows and stuff in rather than sticking to the actual colours. So, if you're inspired to do that, then why not? It's your art and, it's your creation. So if that excites and delights you, then I highly recommend that you do that. So don't be afraid to try different things. Okay, so I've just marked in a few bits and bobs around there. Get that eye in and the shape of the beak up to the side of the face and under the eye like that. And we've got down here in front of the eye, there's that little, what looks like a flap of skin or something coming off there. We've got all these hairs and things, and we've got this other little nostril shape above the big one there. So just mark that in lightly as well. And then the dark around the tip of the beak. Cool. So it looks a bit weird right now, but once we get all the fur and, not fur, it's not fur, feathers, those spiky bits in there, it'll come alive. That's what brings things to life, is tone and colour, or tone. Okay, so I'm going to show you the colours that I've chosen for this guy. Now, as you know, I like to try to keep my palette at the beginning of a painting quite small and not, have too many options, I guess. But I'm just going to adjust that focus a little bit. That's better. But yeah, I thought, gosh, there's so much silver in this, and it's really, I don't have silver pastels. I'm guessing you probably don't either. So it's about finding the colours that are going to work to create this look, I guess. So I spent quite a while doing this, but these are the colours I've kind of picked to try, and we'll probably have to blend a few on the paper to try and create that silvery, shiny look. And I've tried to keep them in order from light to dark. So as I said before, I picked out a couple of greens just with the green background in mind. May not use them, don't know yet. I'll see what I think when I'm finished. And then it's harder to get in and do a background after you've done your painting, but it wouldn't be impossible with this, because you could get to a certain point and think, oh, I do want to have a bit of green or something in there. I might pop it in, just before you finish, and then you can still put some little feathers over the top and soften off those edges. So it's possible. If you want to do it now, by all means, go ahead and throw it in now. It's much easier to do it first rather than last. Anyway, back to colours. So they're my greens. If I use them, maybe I will, maybe I won't. And then I've got a range of greys and purples and blues pretty much. There's a white, there's a very pale blue, and there's another pale blue. So I might just put some swatches on here to see what they look like, because it's always good to test your colours onto another bit of paper. I don't know if that is white, it might be creamy or something, but that's my light. Can't see it on the white paper. This is a pale blue, but I can see that's sort of going to make a nice, see that silvery sort of colour in the beak there? It's a very pale blue. This is another pale blue, but it's not as pale. So it's a little bit darker, but it's still a pale blue. And again, I can see some of that might work in there too. So lots of light kind of bluey purple colours. This is a mauve, a very light mauve. And again, I can see lots of mauve in there. So mauve and blue mostly. This is another mauve, but it's slightly darker, I hope, yes. So that's a purpley kind of colour. and I can see lots of purple in there too. The other one I picked up was this one. It's like a, I don't know, a warm grey, I guess, like a beigey kind of warm grey colour. That'll work in the hair and the feathers and a few other bits and pieces places. So I'm going from light to dark. This is a darker grey, so I can see lots of that in there. And then I've got a darker blue, which might be nice on the beak too, in that darker section on the left-hand side, just to get a bit of the shadow happening over there. And then I've got this purple, which is delicious. It's a lovely dark yum purple. Oh, can't see it, sorry. There. So that's rather lovely, and that will be really nice down in these dark shadow areas. Okay, so I want to try and keep it fairly warm without being too bland and boring. So that's why, you know, I've got this strong darks, because I really like how darks and lights contrast. That's just me. Okay, over on this side, I've got some darks. So what I picked up was this browny grey colour. I thought, well, that's going to be a good mid-tone. And then I've got another brown grey there. This more grey, that one. So there are a couple of good darks as well. And this brown I picked up for the eye, because that's what the eye looks like to me. You might want to put a bit more orange or something in there if you want to warm that up. I might even grab an orange actually. And then I've got black. So I don't often use black, but black is great for drama if you just want to, you know, get that really black hole in the nose and around the eye and that kind of thing to make things pop a bit. So that's my palette. I will grab an orange. I think that might just give that eye a little bit more zing. I'll try this one. See what that looks like. Yeah, that's quite nice. That'll give me a nice, see those two blended together. So when you're doing this, you can kind of blend your colours together and just see what they might look like when they're together. So a little bit of orange in their eye will be fun. Okay, so that's basically my palette. I know there's a lot of colours there, and I might not even use them all, but I thought, you know, there's so many silvers and I don't know, just interesting colours in there that I will need to probably make on the paper rather than have on hand, unless you've got a massive range of pastels and you find all those colours. So what I'm going to do now is take a little 10-minute break, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. So let's get cracking and start to block in some of these colours. So as I mentioned earlier, if you've done your background, that's awesome. If not, then we can do it later or leave it undone. I don't know whether I love this paper colour enough to leave it undone, but I'll see how I go. So the first thing I want to do, if I am going to leave my background unpainted, is just take out any marks of the grid lines and things. I'm using my kneadable eraser to do that. So I just want to make sure that I don't have marks on the background that I might not, you know, be able to get off later on or forget or whatever. Sometimes they're distracting too. Once you've got your drawing in place, it's nice to kind of take all those lines out, because sometimes you can get a little bit, well, I can anyway, get a bit confused about what's where. So now I've taken all of those out, it feels a little bit tidier. The other thing that I try to do is make sure I leave a little mark of where my lines were. So see on that, around the edges here, I've just left a little bit of a mark just on the outside of my paper. So if I need to find those points again down the track, I might have coloured everything and you know, lost where the eye has to go. And then I can just sort of figure out where my grid marks are and do it that way. If I've still got a little bit of marks on the right, on the outside of my paper, it's a bit easier down the track. All right, let's get cracking. So what we want to do now is put down a block colour underneath. And I'm going to put the darks down first. So this is the usual process with pastels. I'm not saying it's what everybody does, but it's what I like to do, and it's what I find works best in this kind of artwork. So I'm going to use, what am I going to use? I think I might go with this brown and or some purple to block in some of the dark areas. So when I say block in, what I mean is just using the pastel on its side. I'll put that away for a sec. Lying it down. So if you've got long sticks like this, you'll probably find they're too long and you might need to break them. So, oh, that's already broken. I didn't realize. But normally, you know, these Art Spectrum pastels come in a long stick, and unless you just draw with the end of it and you don't use it to blend or shade, then that's fine. But if you want to use it to blend and shade, you need to break them, which is a little bit sad. But this size is pretty good. So I usually like to break them into thirds or so. And it's quite manageable on, you know, an A4 page. So what I do is just lie my pastel down flat like that. I'm just going to block in where I see dark. And if you want to figure out where that is, then have a look at your black and white picture. Okay, make sure you leave a bit of edges around where it's going to get fuzzy, because you don't want to have hard lines where it's going to be fuzzed. All right, so that's not dark enough for me, so I'm going to add some purple to that and see what happens. But first I'm going to block in the darks around the head, and as I said before, look at your black and white version. So I'm looking at that now, and so I've got dark under the neck and under the beak. There's dark on the left hand side of the beak and around where that other eye is off in the distance. It's also dark pretty much across the top of the head. So, well, it's not as dark, but I am going to put this dark down on there too. Pretty much just smudging some dark around about, pressing a little lighter as you come down towards the beak, because it's got some lighter tones down through there. So you don't need to put a lot of pastel down initially. You just want to press fairly lightly and push it down like that. Now, I know I haven't done the eye. The eye is actually the darkest part, but I'm going to look at that after. All right. So now I've kind of blocked in some of the darker areas. It's not dark enough for me, so I'm going to add some of this purple. And then we can blend them in and start to create some really nice tones. Yum, yum, yum. And I'm going to do a bit of that up in here as well. Maybe not quite as much, because what I want to do is make sure that those dark hairs or feathers at the end kind of stand out against the background. So the background behind those, I don't want to make very dark. But so I'm just going to smush a little bit of this around. Okay, so you can see I'm just using really light marks. I'm not pushing very hard. I'm not being very strong with it at this point. And so that's the way I like to work with pastels, is just kind of build it up slowly. I'm going to put a bit of purple just in those dark folds on the beak. Now, I know that might be a little bit too dark, but we can come back over it with slightly lighter colours and just build up those tones to try and achieve that silvery kind of effect. I'm also going to darken off in the nostril, and I'm going to pop a bit of this in the eye as well. Now, one reason for doing that is so that I don't lose my eye. So I want to know where my eye is. So if I darken that off now, then that'll keep it nice and strong on my page. There we go. So it's not looking much like an emu just yet, but what we want to do next is kind of push some colours in. So let's grab a finger, any finger, and I just encourage you to sort of just push this colour into the paper. So what that will do is blend it together on the paper and start to create some really nice grey kind of tones. Remember, the edges are soft, so we don't want any hard edges. When you're pulling it around, just pull it softly. And think about the direction of the feathers and which way they're growing, and kind of pull your finger in those directions. And what I find works best is if I try to kind of pretty much leave my finger on the paper and don't lift it off too often. And that way you get a nice continuous line, and you don't end up with random fingerprints all the way through your painting. So I'm going to move up into the head area now and do the same sort of thing. So what I'm doing is I've just got one finger on there and I'm pulling it around, just looking at which direction those hairs grow in and pulling my finger around in that direction. So see how that's starting to look like it's kind of got some texture happening now. So I'm literally not lifting my finger off the paper. And it takes a bit of practice to do this, but once you've got it down pat, you can kind of press really lightly when you just want a very soft touch. And then when you want to blend in nice and hard or thick, you press a bit harder, and it kind of darkens everything off and gets a bit more muddy. Okay. So again, just thinking about which direction do all these feathers grow in, and pulling your finger in those directions. Down here on the beak, I'm just pushing my colour in here. So this is that dark purple that I wanted to get down just to represent my darkest areas. And I'm going to darken those off with black and other things after. This is just my undercoat pretty much. The undercoat always looks a bit rubbish. You can see I've left paper uncovered where I'm going to have light areas. And if I haven't, I can always lighten them up after. Okay. So just pulling some colour around. This is just the blocking in point. So we're just getting some underlay down so that then we've got something to build on top of. Push in the eye as well. So by pushing all the pastel into the paper, you're just getting it to hang on, and it will allow us then to add more over the top. So that's our basic shape, I guess. There's a white crumb there. So you'll find you'll get a fair bit of dust perhaps on your page. Now when that happens, what you don't want to do is blow it, because it ends up all over your house. And then you've got to clean it all up. So I try to tip it off periodically onto a little towel or something that's on your table. So I've got an old tea towel sitting here next to me. So I literally just pick up my little board, tip it on its side and bang it onto your cloth or your towel. And then you can put it back down. You can see where I've done that. So on this section here, all this dust has kind of dropped off in that direction because I banged it on this side, and it's kind of hanging on to the paper. So that's one of the problems with having the paper showing through, or not filling it all in. But you can get it off fairly easily as long as you just dab with your kneadable eraser and don't rub. Sometimes if you rub, it pushes it in and stains it. But if I get it in my eraser, I can literally just dab like that, and it'll kind of pick up all the crumbs of pigment that are sitting there on the paper. So I would usually save this for, do it at the end when you're finished. And then if that doesn't work out and it ends up a big mess, you can just fill the background in anyway. The other cool option is you can buy pastels the same colour as the paper in the Colour Fix. So that's an Art Spectrum brand, and you can actually I forget what this colour is called. Can't remember, but I know there's a pastel exactly the same colour. So there's always that option too. You can actually get the pastels to match your paper, and then you can patch things up and kind of incorporate the paper colour in through your art. It's kind of fun. The other thing is you can, leave part of your art undone and just rely on the paper colour again to be part of that. So there's lots of options. All right, it's looking pretty hairy at the moment, but that's okay. I just want to get some lighter grey down on this section here. This is the neck area. It's just looking a bit weird because I haven't put anything there. So I'm just going to block that in a little bit. And I might use that also around this eye area. So what I'm looking at is, where is this lighter grey going on? This is the bit that maybe the sun's catching on the skin under the beak or inside the feathers. And I'm just going to zhoosh a bit of that around as well. So this is how we start to build up the tones and the colours. So we've put the dark down already, and that's fine. Putting a bit of this light grey over the top. And again, I'm doing it on its side, so it's a nice little short, flat piece. And just pulling it around again in the direction of the hairs, because what that's going to do now is give me a lovely, thick, lush feeling of, not hairs, feathers. While I've got this in my hand, I'm going to pop a bit of it down here on the beak. So this is not my lightest colour. It's sort of probably the darker grey tone that I'm after. But I can see a little bit of that through there. So I'm just going to push that around in there. So that's my mid-grey. It's that little one there. It's kind of not dark, not light. And we need all the mids. They're really important, most as important as your lights and darks. Okay. So what do we want to do next? I think I want to work on the neck area. So I'm just thinking in order of how to approach this. And I like to work from back to front. I said that earlier because it's easier pretty much to get everything in behind the main thing first and then work forward. So thinking about this one, there's the neck is pretty much under the beak and the beak is in the foreground. So let's work on that neck area first and kind of get that looking a bit more feathery, get a little bit more tone going on in there, and then we'll come up into the head area. So what I want to do now, I've got my darks down in there, but I really want to add some of these browny colours. Now, you might have chosen purples and blues. It's up to you. It's a whole bunch of fun to, mix it up a little bit. But again, looking at the feathers and noticing the direction that they're growing in will help you to determine which direction to pull your pastel in. So this piece of pastel I've got is my browny grey. It's like a warm grey colour. And I'm using it again on its side. I tend to do this a lot rather than using the end of a pastel. The end of a pastel is great if you want to get a hard line, for instance, like that around the eye. Use the end because you can find some sharp edges usually. But if I want sort of soft, feathery effects, or if I want to fill in an area fairly quickly, then using the pastel on its side like this is pretty great. See how that's starting to build up some texture now? Because I've got the dark colour underneath, the purple under there, I've used my warm or mid-grey over the top of it. So you can start to see now it's looking like it's getting a bit thick and lush with feathers. Before I go any further though, I want to push this in over here on the neck, this lighter grey area. And again, that's got some fuzz around it, so I'm just going to blur the edges off. And you can do that with your finger just by gently pulling out the edges softly, softly. So it's all sort of fuzzy. Now down on the side of the neck there, actually that's much lighter than what I've done. I'm going to lighten that off a bit more with, might try this blue. down in here, I'm going to put a bit more light on there, because this blue, I think, is something I'm going to be using in the beak up here. Let me see what that looks like. That's going to be nice and bright. Beautiful. All right, so I'm going to pop a bit of it down here, because this is where the light's catching on the side of the neck. And it's a similar colour and it's a similar tone to what I can see on the beak in the light sections. Okay, smush a bit of that on there, and then I'm going to push that in. Again, thinking about the direction of the feathers and which way they grow. It doesn't matter if you overlap the stuff we just did, because we can put more over the top of that after. Because what I want to do is define this shadow quite strongly, and it runs in a very strong shape down through there, doesn't it? Now, because I put one layer of light down, I've just put another layer over the top of that, and it's just sitting there loosely on the paper. If I liked the texture, I could just leave it like that, but I'm going to push it in gently. So you kind of get used to using your fingers in different ways, and different pressure will have a different outcome. Okay, so I've got a hard line now between here and here. So what I want to do is soften that off a little bit, and get a bit of the fur or the feathers to kind of come across there. Just pulling it across with my fingers at the moment. See how that's sort of softened off that edge a little bit. And then I'm going to try some of the blue. So this is a darkish blue. I'm just going to see what happens if I use a bit of that down through here in some of these feathery areas. It just warms it up, I think. It's fun to add other colours and just see how they work. And noticing too that it's actually quite dark just in here, that little section there. I'll try some purple in there too. Don't be afraid to try different colours. It's kind of fun. But the main thing to look for is your tone. How dark and how light is something. If we want to get a darker colour in there, it doesn't always have to be a black or a brown or a grey. You can try blues and purples. You can get some really beautiful darks in pastels in those colours. There's some stunning colours. And they just make for beautiful, fun times. So you can see I've got quite a lot of dust now sitting here on there. Now if I blend all that in, it's going to get messy again, and I want to try and keep it pretty clean. I'm quite happy with how that's looking at the moment. I might add a bit more blue. So you can see as we're building up the layers, I'm blending, not blending now. I'm just going to let all this sort of sit on the top and look feathery. That's my goal. Okay, and then I'm going to tip off my dust because it's distracting and it gets in the way. Sometimes it just won't blend in. Doesn't matter what you do, just end up with all this dust on your page. Okay, so that's looking all right. I'm going to come in. We'll have to do detail around the beak here, and then we'll overlap these lighter hairs that are around below the beak over this section here, and bring that up into the face. So what I've done there is I've kind of probably put a bit too much stuff down in here, but what I want to do is have enough there so that I can come over it later with the other feathers, and it'll still have enough background to support it. So you've got to kind of overlap things sometimes just to make sure that you get everything in the right place and don't have gaps around things. So for instance, I don't want to have a big halo between these feathers and the ones that are going to sit on top of it. All right, so now we've got that next section done. We might work our way up around the eye here. We've got some soft furry kind of bits that are coming off the side of the neck here too. So I'm going to use my little grey one and just sort of try and do these little wispy kind of shapes out through there. They're further away and they're not in focus, so we just want to make sure they stay fairly blurry. And so I'm just using the pastel on its side again and just very, very lightly pulling it out to try and create that kind of furry feather effect down through there. Because if you look at the side of the neck where the light's catching, and then this grey fur on the right, it's quite distinct, isn't it, in tone? You can tell there's a big difference in the tone. So the neck's much lighter where it's catching the sun, and then where this fur or hair starts is a little darker. That's going to need a bit more work, I think. So I'm just going to pick up this other grey and run around with that through there. So sometimes you need a couple of tones of things, even though this part is not terribly obvious in the scheme of things. When you do stuff like this, you've got to have a couple of tones just to give a nice variation of depth. Okay, and then I'm just very gently pulling that out with my finger. So I'm putting my finger down on the line between the dark and the light and just pulling it outwards. Flick, down, flick. So I'm trying to get that edge to look lovely and soft and fading off like that. Still reckon that neck needs to be lighter in there, but we can come back and lighten that up later, I reckon, even though I really want to do it now. Put a bit of light blue on there. Yeah, nice. So you can see it how I just ran that over there. What I'm going to do there is just leave it sitting like that because I don't want to blend it in. I want the brightness of that pastel to stay on the top and give it some sunshine. So I'm going to leave that as it is and do my best not to blend it in. I'm a chronic blender. I can't help myself. I'm going to try really hard not to. All right, so that's our, I was going to say emu. That's our emu so far. So let's have a look at this area up around where the beak and the cheek are on this right-hand side. So we've got a bit of information happening in there. And all we're going to do now is start to look at this area, not the eye itself, but in around here is this grey kind of colour. Okay, so what I'm doing is trying to get a bit of that grey down on there. This is a kind of darker grey. And then start to pull some of the feathers across through there. Because what's going on now is we've got feathers coming down over the neck area that we've just done. So down through here. And I'm using this grey because I don't want to go too light yet. I know I can darken it off if I need to add a bit more dark. And I can lighten it up if I need to add more light. I just want to get a bit of a feeling for it first and kind of figure out how that's going to work. Because it's separate to the neck, it's sitting forward, it's brighter and the lines are more defined because it's closer to us. So that's the grey. I'm going to try this darker grey now, see if I can get that to give me a bit more oomph. No? Okay. Just going to pull a few of them out from the side. So just look at the direction that these feathers are all kind of growing in. Pull them in that direction. So see how that's starting to now build up this little separate section of feathers on top of that neckline. I'm going to pick up this purpley colour. So I just want to get a few light ones in there, and that will put it on top of the other stuff. That'll bring it forward and closer. There we go. So that's starting to get some life now. Still using this light, it's a very light lilac-y colour to get some of the light feathers working around the side of the face there too. And then up through here, this section in here, see there's quite a light grey area around through there. So I'm just marking that in with this, probably not the right colour, but it'll do for now. The eye looks really weird. I want to do the eye because it's just not looking right. But anyway, we'll do this bit first. Impatient. Now, what do I want? I want this bluey colour because I can see just around here under the eye, you can see there's a little bit, looks metallic like the beak almost. So we're going to have to try a few different colours to see what works for this. This is my very pale blue. Still not silver enough. When you do the final hairs too, if you have pencils, that might be a really good option. Oh, I feel like I need to go and find another blue. I need an in-between one. What's this one going to do? This is a dark blue. If I pop that over that very light blue, see what happens. The nice thing about pastels is you can mix them on the paper. So you can kind of push colours around together and just see how they work. It's not too bad. Might be a little bit dark, but I quite like. No, it's too dark. I'm going to have to find another blue. A mid blue. Something like that, I think. Let's see what that does. So what I'm trying to create is that silvery effect. And it takes a bit of practice. I was doing this the other night in a seascape and trying to get reflections and things on the water. And it was, yeah, it's so interesting trying to replicate colours when it's not a colour. So this, for instance, is really, I wouldn't call it grey. It's more silver, but I don't have silver, obviously. I do actually, just don't know where it is. But it wouldn't be silver enough for this. So I'm just sort of dancing between my very light lilac and some blues and some greys to try and get this colour working. Now we're getting closer. That's better. So you just got to keep trying until it kind of comes together. Still a little bit too mauve maybe, but I can add more light blue over the top of it. So I'm just going to zhoosh some of this mauve down on here. What I want to start to do is blocking in some of the light while I've got it in my hand. Okay. This is when I get the most joy out of my painting. It's when I find the lights. So notice up here under the feathers on the front of the nose, so between the eyes pretty much, the under the feathers is this light beak kind of colour. And then we've got darker feathers on top. So I know we blocked all this in with a mid and a dark before, but we need to get a little bit more light in there now so that when we put the feathers over the top, for instance, like this later, we'll have a lighter colour underneath. But it's still too purple, so I'm just going to add some of this light blue and try and get it more silvery. I think a bit of grey would be good too. Grey would be most good, most helpful. Okay. So you can see I'm not kind of blending with my fingers too much. What I'm doing is just letting the pastel sit on the surface and mix with the colour underneath, so it's starting to kind of create its own combination of colours. cool, cool. Grey. So pop a bit of grey over that. Is that the right grey or is it not? Yeah, it's close. It's close. Okay. And then, you know, there's so many different little tones within this silver too, isn't there? There's lighter areas and darker areas. There's little bumps and ridges. And so what I'm trying to find at this point is the light. So the light silver colour. And then I can start to work on getting some shadows and stuff in there. Just going to jump back over to the left side of the beak where it's in shadow and make my darker grey in there. Now that I've got some of this light on top or underneath, put some of this dark grey through there, and that should start to give me some form. I'm trying to now think about the dark colours, that the shadows and the shapes that I can make happen in here. I think purple's going to be a good choice for some shadow. I'm just going to mark it in with this grey first because it's a good mid-tone. It's not too strong, so I can go over it and strengthen it up where I need to. Notice on the side of the beak too, it's got this lovely shadow kind of effect through there, because the side of the beak has, it's the mouth, so it's dark around the edges of that, so we'll pop that in after. I'm just still sort of doing the big blocky movements at this point, not really doing too much of the detail. So I'm just literally just patching colour around, seeing what works. What's this one? Is that white? No, it's blue. Putting a bit of this light blue on now just to try and get some of those little highlighted areas. So see all the funny little shapes across the nose there? We've got all those little ridges and they've all got shadow and they're all catching light on one side and then they're casting shadow on the other. And so what you want to be looking for right now, if you've got your lightest pastel in your hand, what I'm looking for is the lighter areas and just literally putting this down. I'm pressing pretty hard so that it makes a nice, strong, bright colour or tone. So just noticing where the light bits are, and that will be the area where all the sun's catching. So it's around the nostril areas, kind of outlines those a little bit, but only on the sunny side. What's good about these is that, you know, if you muck it up, if you put it in the wrong place, you can just take it off or go over it. And that's what I like the best, is it's very forgiving pastels. You can redo things quite a few times before the paper's too full. There we go. So I've just patched in a bit of light here and there. It's looking a bit crazy at the moment, but we can refine that. Okay. While I've got this light one in my hand, I'm just going to do a few little light hairs off to the side here. So remember that area around the neck, or above the neck, between the beak and the neck. And there's some little hairs that kind of all hang there. So I'm just going to put a few little light ones in around that section there. Like a bit of light through here. Just noticing all the little light bits, and if you get confused with feathers and things, just look at everything as a shape. Even if you have to zoom in on your picture and get up really close, or break it down into sections again. So you can literally cover up, you know, half of it and just look at one half and do it that way. And that way it kind of, it becomes shapes rather than things, and it becomes a lot easier when you break something down into pieces. Just look at it as shapes. Just trying some blue over here on the shadow side. I think I'm going to want purple. It's not dark enough. A bit of this dark purple in there. So it's really just lots of experimenting with colours to see what works and what doesn't. And it's all about tone, isn't it? So where you want, you know, your darker tones, figuring out which colour and then which tone of that colour is going to work. So I'm just trying this blue. I know it's not the same blue as on that beak on the picture, but it's the right tone because it's darker. Yeah. So pastels are lovely for getting texture. So this beak has lots of texture on it. It looks kind of smooth, but I think it probably feels a bit lumpy in spots. And so getting the feeling of that with the pastels is fun. I've just picked up white, so you can see the difference the white makes when you're using a pale blue or another light color. You kind of go, oh, that's the lightest, but once you put some white down, you can see how much brighter the white is. And I like to keep my white just for the really shiny bits. And I often say, save your white for last. So don't pick it up until you get to the end. And you can put your really bright bits on. Okay, so I'm just going to start to look at some shadow areas. See that little bit of that thing in front of the eye there? I don't know what it's called. A little bit of wrinkly skin or something. So it's light on the top and then it's got a shadow underneath it because it's catching the light and casting a shadow. So I can make a little shadow around the bottom of it and then brighten up the top bit in here. Okay. So I'm going to mark in the nostrils now. We've got one little one over here on the left. And if you can see, that's just a little tiny little shape through there. And then we've got this really big one here. So I'm using a black pastel. I'm just going to try and fill that in and get it nice and black. I'll need to tip some dust off, I think. So again, looking at the, you know, the difference black makes on everything now. So suddenly my lights got lighter because I've put this beautiful, big, strong black in there. And then we've got the other little one just above there. A bit closer. So that's more like a triangular shape. It's not quite as dark as the round nostril. I might smoosh a bit of black over here, just lightly, because I want a bit more shadow in there. So you can, you know, kind of travel around with your dark or your black and just darken things off a little bit more. I like to create drama. I like the lights and the darks. So don't be afraid of the dark. Now, while I've got this in my hand, I'm going to just mark in that line around the beak, that mouth line around there. So that's quite a strong mark. And I'm going to put that in first with the black, and then I'll get my darker greys and things and sort of soften it off a little bit and try and create the feeling of the layers of the beak there. Dying to do the eye. It's driving me crazy. All right, tip off some of my dust. Okay, so I've got a bit of distinction happening there. I've picked up my warm grey. This is my darker warm grey, and I just want to start to work on a bit of the detail down here on the beak and the mouth. So I'm just marking some lines in, noticing the shape and how it kind of gets a little bit wider out here in that area there. And we'll have to pop some more feathers over the top to soften that off in a minute. And then just noticing, you know, the shape of that, and then it kind of tapers in as it comes down under the beak, and then it comes out a little bit, so it sort of comes out like a bottom lip there. I've got this lip area coming through there, and then you can't see anything else on the left hand side. All right, just want to lighten up this bit here, even though the left side of the beak is darker than the right because it's in the shadow. But if I look at the feathers around the left side of the beak that kind of run around the edge of it, they're darker around there. So I'm just going to try, see if this is dark enough to get a distinct edge on there, because the beak looks like it's too wide, but it's actually all this feathery stuff that needs to sit there. And then that's the eye. A bit more blue. See how you can get quite a few layers on here. It will scream at me soon and say, no more. When it does that, you can always use fixative to set the layers, and then you can get more over the top of it. So it's called workable fixative, and it's really good if you want to seal the layers and then add more. I don't use it too much because, and especially not on your last layer, because it will dull the colours in your painting. So it kind of makes everything get a bit darker. And if you've got a lot of light in there, it takes the brightness out. Okay. Got to leave this beak alone in a minute. So I'm just kind of working with my blues still, trying to get that silvery effect and the tones happening. I think everyone's going to have homework, even me. Some weeks we get it all done, and then others we don't quite make it. Okay. Got distracted there for a minute. Okay, so I need to darken off this stuff over here because I want to define the edge of that beak a bit more. Just using my black, but I'm just doing it on its side, so I'm trying to keep my mark quite soft and fuzzy and not too strong. And the eye is there, so we can't forget that. And I'll pop a bit of brown on there after, and then we'll come over the top of that. Yeah, that's looking a bit better. Cool. So you've just got to, sometimes you just got to work on the shape of a thing to make sure you get the right shape, because, you know, beaks and eyes and so forth are quite distinct in their shapes, and it's important to get them right. Otherwise, your painting is going to be off. Okay. I'm just studying this now. I'm just looking at it from a distance, It's always good to step back and look at something from a distance if you want to get a better view of it. So that's one good reason to stand at an easel, because you can step back all the time. When you're sitting at a desk like this, it's a little harder to see things with perspective, and it's a great idea to get up and walk away and just take your eyes off it for a minute and then come back, and it's amazing what you can see when you do that. It changes your whole view. Alrighty, now just going to go back into these nostrils and tidy those up a little bit, because I've left a bit of a mess in there. And then I'll go again around the base of the beak and try to get some of that detail in there as well. So with the nostril, we've got two little holes here on the right. One's a triangular shape. It's darker down in the bottom left edge or point, and then it kind of softens off as it comes up. So that's kind of telling me that it's dipping down in there, and we can't see in the dark bit down through there, but as the light gets in around it, it's lightening up. So it's not a completely dark triangle. It's got a little bit of gradient in it. So one side is much darker than the other. I've got a little bump on there I need to get rid of. So work like this you might find easier with pencils. So, you know, to do smaller areas and finer lines, pencils are great. Pastel pencils or charcoal. Charcoal pencils are also great. So I've just got a little black one here. This is a Conti. I think it's charcoal, I'm not sure. So that's helping me get my detail in there. Can you see how that's all happening? And while I've got my pencil in my hand, then I can sort of start to do just a few fine lines around in the area of the nose and get a little bit more information in there. And because I've already got pastel down on the page and I'm just pressing lightly, it's not too black. If I wanted it blacker, I can press harder. But what's happening now is I'm doing this with my pencil. It's sort of blending with all the colours that are already on there, but it's darkening it off gently, because what I'm trying to do is just create a bit of shadow, a bit of tone. And I think that's working quite well. I need to get more white. Which one's my white? This one? In here. Get that shape back into the beak there. So it's easy to lose parts of what you've done when you run over them all the time. You kind of, yeah, jam in together, and then you've got to define the lines again and keep kind of coming back in and brightening things up. And then quietening them down again if they get too bright. Tipping off some dust again. Okay, and so I can sort of just dab all this a little bit and soften it off. If your lines are too hard or too much, you can just gently dab the pastel into the paper and just make it softer. So it just depends on how much detail you want in there, and you know, how significant you want your darks and your lights. Okay. All right, so I'm going to leave the beak there for now. We can come back and do more on that afterwards. I do want to get stuck into the area around the mouth. So that's this part here. And just get a little bit more information into there. And we need a bit of a light in there too, just to define that. And we've got a few little lines up here that come up, like little ridges under the eye from the beak. And again, if you find those lines are too hard or dark, you can soften them off. Just dab them with your finger. If you have some rubber tip blenders, then they're really handy too. So this is one, and you can get little sets and they come in different shapes. So you can actually just use those to soften things off and pull the pastel around as well. Because often it's hard to get your fingers into all the spots. And so if you have a blender like that, then it just really helps to pull it around and get it into the right, in those little tiny little areas where your fingers are too chunky. So that's very handy to have. Okay, what do we got to do next? Now I want to put a bit of light down around the mouth area there. So I'm going to use this light brown that I picked up earlier. I don't think I've used that yet. There's a little bit of light just here on the mouth. So it's not super light. Maybe it needs to be a tad lighter. So I'm going to add a bit of my creamy colour over the top just to lighten that up a little bit and then soften off the edges a tad. So that just adds a bit of shine onto the bottom of the beak area there. And again, that's another indication of where the light's coming from. And then we also have some light up through here. There's a little bit of light skin through there and in through here. And this is where all those little light feathers kind of come out from around that beak area. So first we need to put dark ones in. Grey, I think. I want a grey. So again, just like we did earlier, we're putting these back in again. So you've got to keep kind of adding your layers all the time. Down through there. I know it doesn't look like you can see them very well, but we actually can't anyway. And then we'll add some little light ones over the top, and they'll be the whiskers on the top that are catching the light. Now, if you have pencils, again, you can try pencils rather than pastels. So pastel pencil, this is a charcoal pencil. I love using white charcoal. Sometimes it just seems to be whiter than a pastel pencil. And so for the fine lines and the little hairs and things, your pencils are really great. So I'm just putting a few little light marks over there to brighten up some of these little feathers and bring them forward. Remember, they don't all go in the same direction. So he's a bit scruffy, this guy. So make sure you kind of move your pencil or your pastel around so that you're creating different directions with your feathers. Okay, well, I've got this in my hand. I'm just going to add a bit of light up here under the eye area. Coming together slowly but surely. And there's a lovely shine on the beak just down through here. I'm just going to add a little bit of shine on there. So, hang on, I need to add a bit more blue first. So looking at that, there's a little stripe of like silver or blue down through here, and then it's got a shine on top of it. So it's like a little fold out of the beak, keeping off dust. And then, yeah, a little shine on the top of the beak. Yeah, it's my white pencil. Sometimes your pencils get so dirty you don't know what colour they are because they pick colour up from each other. Okay, so I'm going to darken off in here again. So I'm just checking, always checking the shapes, coming back under the beak through here with my black pencil because I just want to make that area slightly darker and a little bit stronger. So again, it's going to come forward in front of all that neck detail. Okay, and then try a bit of grey. And just a few little feathers over the edge of that to soften that off. Through there. And again, you can see now with the black, I've lost my blackness, I guess, of that first line that I put down through there. And that's actually okay because I didn't want it to be that strong. So by going over it with my greys and my other dark colours, it's sort of softened off the black. So now it's not as defined as it was, which is good. All right, before we get into that big eye, let's just pop over to this left eye. I'm going to put a bit of my brown in there. I know it's not easy to see, but it is definitely there, and so we need to make sure we include it. So I've put some of my brownie colour that I'm using in my eyes. I might as well stick it on the other one while I'm there. I tend to, if I pick up a colour, I tend to go, oh, where else can I put this before I put it down? So I've just browned off in here as well, in this little eye. I know I had purple underneath it, but that was just to get some nice dark underpainting done first. All right, so a bit of brown on the left one there, and it is quite black also. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a black line through here. So this eye is not very obvious, but we still need to make sure it's there. And then it's got little feathers all around it. So they're not all necessarily black, but I'll just do a few little black ones. You can see I'm using my pastel now to do some fluffy bits. So if you don't have pencils, your pastels will work. Just got to find an edge. Okay, and then a few little eyelashes just to soften that off over there. So look at the direction that you're putting in those little eyelashes. They're sort of shorter, slightly shorter, and they come out almost horizontal above the eye there. And then the other feathers all sort of poke up, towards the sky more. So I'll just put a few of those in just to get a taste of how that's going to look when I bring all the other dark feathers across the face afterwards. Yeah, I think that's going to work nicely. And so that eye is pretty much done over there. You can leave that for now. And get over into the other eye. So while I've got black in my hand now, I'm going to do the outline of the eye over here, big eye. Again, I'm using my pastel. If you have a pencil, you might be happier using that. You do have a bit more control with a pencil because I find I can see the point easier, and I can also get a sharper point on a pencil than I can on a pastel. But I don't know whether it's laziness and I can't be bothered picking up a pencil, or if I just like the challenge of trying to make it work with pastel. A bit of both, maybe. Okay, so notice the top of the eye is in more shadow, okay? And then the bottoms, it's only very slight, but there's a slight orangey tinge to the bottom. So what I've done there is I've put a dark outline around the eye, and I've done a few little like marks with my pastel. It's picked up other colours as it goes, but you can see on the actual picture that there is quite a lot of detail in that area, and a few other colours. So for instance, there's a bit more like a brown underneath the eye area there. We've got that that skin sort of colour in around here. So there's a few different things happening through there. Just look at them as shapes and put them in as you see the shapes. So see how I just add a little bit of this beigey kind of colour while it's in my hand. I've just seen a bit of it in the beak as well. It might be in my imagination, but I'm going to pop a bit of that in there too. If I have one colour in one place, I like to have it in a couple of places. I know that sounds weird, but I just feel it kind of unites the painting a little bit more, even if it's just a smidge somewhere else in the painting. It just feels like it all works together, unless you want to make a huge statement and just have a big blob of one colour that you didn't use anywhere else. But I do like to sort of, share it around. Now, see on the outside of the eye, the brown bit, just around there, I'm using this light brown again to very softly, and I'm going to smudge this in a minute, draw a little edge around there, okay? Because it is slightly lighter, and I think I said I was going to use orange to do that, but I wanted to put that lighter tone down first, okay? And then I'm going to pick up my orange, make sure it's clean, and then run a little bit of that around as well. what I'm trying to avoid is having to get my fingers in here and blend. And if I use the pastels to blend, then hopefully that might work. So just a smidge of orange around the outline of the eye on the kind of right side and the bottom. Just a little bit, just to give it a little bit of warmth and make it a bit more interesting. Because we want to have a bright spot in here. This has got to be the focus or the thing that draws the eye. Ha ha ha. Excuse the pun. I just realised then. So I'm just smushing a bit of orange on here. It's kind of mixing in with the brown I've already got there. But see how it's starting to form this lovely kind of shine. So a smidge of orange and then coming up into the brown just is giving me this lovely little feeling of a shine. I love doing eyes. They're heaps of fun. And then if I wanted to come back again around that edge, I might bring my light brown back over that again, just very lightly. No, don't like it. It's too much. So to soften that off, see it's a little bit too strong. I don't want it to be that defined. Soften that off. I'm just going to dab it gently with my finger and soften that off a little bit. So that's starting to look quite nice. I like what's happening there. It's coming alive. Alive. I'll put more black around the outside in a moment. What I want to do first though is get the pupil in. So even though it's quite dark, the whole thing is quite dark, we can still see the pupil. I can see it better on my iPad because I've got the picture on that as well as printed out. So the printout is not as clear. But I do want to at least suggest that it's there. So using black, putting that in there just softly like that. That's nice. Okay. And then I've got to tip off my dust again. Okay. So I'm just going to dab this a little bit and soften it off. There we go. So now that's starting to look like an eye. And now I want to get in back around the outside of it. I'm going to use a pencil. I want this black line around the eye to be more defined, because this is the focus, this thing. This is what is going to draw attention first up. Okay, so we've got to make that nice and rich around there. Noticing the shapes in different tones around the eye too. So see in this area here, in the middle, or where the tear duct centre bit is, it's quite dark through there too. So I'm going to just darken that off in there a little bit. So we've got a few layers of skin around the eye. There's a few, like, you know, you've got your big eye rim, and then there's another little layer under that. And then there's another colour of dark under that. So kind of, it's got this saggy sort of look of skin and stuff under the eye there. It's not quite black enough. Let me tip dust off again. Pencils also make dust. So I'm going to pick up my pastel. Make sure that's my black one. See this bit of pastel? It's been broken. So you can see it's got like a little jagged edge on the top there. I'm going to use that jagged edge to try and get some nice fine lines. So if you need to break pastels to find a sharp edge, you can do that too. So I'm just going to use it a little bit like a pencil and use that edge, that pointy edge, to get the darks in there. And then up around the top here. And I'm going to darken off around the top of the eye as well. Remember I said there's shadow there because it's darker. It's got an eyelid, and it's also got all the feathers sitting over the top of it. So we need to darken that off a little bit more to create a little bit of depth in there. Okay, this is coming together. And then darkening off around inside the eye area there, in towards the nose. I've got all these funny little bits of bumps and things. And so I'm just using, again, that sharp edge on my pastel to get some of the shadow lines and things in there. I'll go back down to the beak and put a bit more in there. So you can kind of travel around with the one colour if you feel like you need to do that and sharpen things up, darken things a little bit more. It's a bit too much. Or lighten them. So you can kind of dance now between your tones and start to refine it a little bit more. All right, so that's coming together quite well. And I'm just going to lighten this bit up here. This is my cream or white. Now the other bit we need to put light on is that rim around the eye. So see, I'm just putting a bit more light on here now. That's my white, I think, or cream. Or cream. Cool, cool. All right, so around the rim of the eye, where we put all this black area, it's got a shine. Remember we did that before with the charcoal? And so I'm going to try and do it with this cream. I'll just find a little sharp edge on that too. You might prefer to use a pencil if you have one handy. So that's a little bit too strong or too defined, but I can grab my black pencil again and just very lightly rub over that and soften it down a bit. Or I can press harder on the inside to make it look more shiny. So you kind of got to play around with things a little bit until you get the right effect. And the shine on there is a broken line, so it's not one hard, strong, big line. It's kind of broken. Cool. Then just around the outside of the eye, I just want to put a bit more of this browny colour in around here, and then we can stick some feathers in. There's a bit more black up here on the right. A bit like that. Cool. And then we're going to pop some feathers in around the top of the head and down onto the beak. So you can see we've got all those lovely little dark feathers that pop out of the beak at the top there. So this will be the final touches that we get to add on. Now, as I said before, if you don't have a pastel pencil, you might use a piece of pastel stick. But first we want to do all the feathers that are up the back or behind, and we're going to come forward then and put the finer ones that we can see more distinctly in the front. So I'm going to use a bit of black first off, but I want all the feathers that are further off on the top of the head to be softer, be a little bit softer and not quite as defined or strong as the ones that we're going to come in the front with. So what I'm doing is using my pastel on its side again and just pulling it up and down so that you're drawing a line, but it's a soft line. Okay, so we want to start to build up all this feathery stuff on the top of the head, get it nice and thick. So I'm kind of starting at the back, and I know there's light ones in there too, and I'm going to pick up my grey or something and put a bit more light in there. Okay, so I've kind of built up some of that. And then I can grab my, which grey? This one? And do the same kind of thing with that. So we're getting this nice and thick and lush. You might lose some of the definition of your black. That's okay. You can always put more on. So pulling that around. As I said, you might be using bright pink or red or blue or something fun. And it'll depend on the colour of your paper too. If you're on a darker paper, then your edges will be easier to sort of soften off because they'll wander off into the dark paper. Because I'm on a light paper, I can see all the edges quite easily. Just realised my eye's not the right shape. I need to come down through there a bit. It's better. So it's not a pure circle, is it? It has a little angle on it down through there. So now I've got to add more shine. So this is what happens. You kind of assess things and you think, oh no, that's a bit different to that. And you can just keep changing it. The lovely thing about pastels is nothing's going to dry out or you know, go off or set or anything. So you can literally put this away and come back in a year, pick it up and keep going because nothing's changed. That's what I love about it. It's the immediacy of it and the ability to just pick it up any old time, and no need for, you know, solvents and brushes and water and palettes and all that stuff. Okay, so I'm just putting black hair back in, or fur, feather stuff. You know me, I never describe things properly. So see how that's getting nice and thick and lush through there? I feel like I need to add some more light just to get some highlights happening in the background there. You can see in the picture there's quite a lot of, probably light blue actually would be a better option to get some of the light feathers in there. Where is that? Here. Try this one first. Try a bit of everything. Why not? Just to get the different range of tones in there. There's quite a lot of light stuff. And then that will make the black pop if we have enough light behind it or in amongst it. So as I'm coming forward, I'm sort of getting a little bit more defined with my mark. So the stuff off in the background is now starting to look nice and thick and lush. That's lovely. That's what I wanted. You can still add a few more light bits if you wanted to. Like that. See how the light, or the little light ones then just pop forward. They catch the light and they sit forward. So it starts to create a lovely lush thick head of feathers. Cool. Now I'm going to come back with black. I'll try pencil, see if that's going to do it for me. Sometimes I find the pencil's not dark enough. No, it's not dark enough. So I'm going to pick up my pastel and I'm going to do all these little front feathers. So again, staying up in the head for a second and just working on getting some of these dark marks in front of the light ones and building up that lovely thickness. Try to vary the direction a little bit because, as I said before, he's a bit scruffy, this fella. So we want to make sure that we, you know, don't have him too neat and tidy and everything's in order because he's a bit messy. So just a few harder lines as I come forward towards the beak with the feather marks. And now I'm going to start to come down into here. Probably should be starting at the beak and then lifting my pastel up so that I can kind of get these wispy sort of feathery ends on the tips of them rather than in towards the skin of the beak. So see how, because we've got the background of the beak down now under there, and we can bring these feathers over the top, starting to look like it's 3D. It's great. It's amazing the feathers grow out of the beak, actually. Who knew? And then down this little patch here, so down in the front here. And there's also shadows of these feathers on the beak. Can you see those? So through here, let me try this. There's shadow there. I'm just going to use purple because I love purple for shadows. Just darken that off a little bit through there. And then we've got shadow, see through here, these little marks down through there. I reckon that's shadow of all these feathers. So if I do those in a purple or a blue or whatever you've got handy, and then draw the feathers in kind of in front or next to the shadows, because the shadow is coming from the feathers on the right, because that's where the light is. Okay, so I've got this tuft of spiky little black feathers that come out from here. And then as you get forward nearer to the nostrils, they're kind of little short, stumpy dots, creating some texture and bumps and things. Interesting. So I find the pastel is a harder, well, not harder, it's softer actually. So I'm getting a blacker mark than I do with my pencils. Depends on the brands, I guess. There we go. So you could potentially come back in with some of the brown maybe that I've used in my eye, just to get a bit more warmth into that. I don't want them all to be black and boring. Black can be quite a dead, heavy kind of colour. So as powerful as it is, sometimes it's nice to soften it off a little bit with other colours. Okay. So we're just about there. I think the final thing we need to do is just get some little light feathers over the eye there. So that kind of, they're coming out around the eye and they're going in this sort of direction like eyelashes. So we want to kind of soften off around the top of the eye and make sure that those little feathers come up across there like that. I did that in a grey. And then you could add a couple of little light ones as well, because some of those are catching the light. Again, you could use a light pencil or just the sharp edge on a pastel. That's a bit too much, so I can just come back in with a darker grey and break up those marks a little bit. Cool. There we go. And then it's just a matter of running around your picture and going, oh, you know, maybe I need a bit more dark down through here under the neck. So I can just come back in there and put the pastel on its side. This is a black, and just darken that off a little bit further. So you can kind of play around a little bit with your tones and make sure you've got everything how you want it. Overlapping all of these feathers here so that I've got a nice softness around him. And just having another check, might just put a little bit more light back around my eye. I've lost some of that. So you can come back in and touch up little things like that. I don't know whether a shine in the eye would be useful or not. Let me see. Potentially you could pop a little spot of pale blue or white, something there, and just give him a little shine. Makes him look like he's looking at you. Dab it off if it's too bright. I might just pop a few more little feathers around here just to soften off the inside line of the eye. So there you have it. One Easter emu. Can't wait to see yours. And yeah, it would be a bunch of fun to do this in crazy colours, I reckon. Heaps of fun. So again, just running around it again, you know, just check, does that need to be darker? Does something need to be lighter? Walk away, have a break, come back, and you'll see things differently. Always do. It's not where the nostril goes, Jeannie, it's here. I just lost my other little nostril on the other side. So I'm going to pop a little, it's like an oval shape there, and then it's got a little bit of light on it. It's not light enough. A little bit of light. So just noticing those little things that determine where light and dark go. So you might want to add a bit more light into different spots. If you do that where you've already put your feathers, then you might need to put them back in. So you can come and go and dab around a little bit. You do have to know when to stop though. There is a point where you just can't keep going. The paper will fill up, and if it does do that, you can, as I said before, you can spray it with a fixative, or you can wash it all off and start again. Done that. And washing it off actually makes really nice backgrounds. So, for instance, if I got a brush and water and shushed it all over this, let it dry, then I would have a really nice background colours to do something else with. So you don't have to waste your paper, is what I'm saying. You can reuse it. And doing a water wash underneath your pastels is also a really nice thing to do, especially if you're filling in a large area and you just want to get, one colour down, or a wash of some sort, or a sky or something. You can put watercolour under pastels. You can just wash it in like that on a light coloured paper. You can get this paper in white. So, if you wanted to start with white, you can just colour it yourself. Or you can do it with pastels. So there's lots of options. The world is your oyster. So there you go. I'm just noticing where there's little light bits throughout this. So in between the little hairs or feathers up around the face, there's little light patches that kind of see through onto the beak and the surface. So you can always patch a few of those back in if you've lost some of the light. It's a bit like putting sky holes in trees. If you fill them up too much, you can just put a bit of blue in to get the sky back. Lovely. So he needs a bit more work. I wouldn't mind spending some more time on this guy. I think he could be quite lovely. And again, experimenting with your purples and your reds and oranges and things, and just see what you can do and what beautiful colours you can create. So I think with that combination of colours, I think we did all right making a silvery kind of effect. The purples and the blues all seem to work quite well for that. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun mixing colours. And as I said before, often it's a good thing to test them first on a scrap bit of paper before you decide what palette you're going to use. I'm a bit naughty. I just tend to jump in and regret it later. We'll figure it out. But that's the fun part for me. I really love finding the colours that work. It's super exciting. So you can see I'm still dabbling around here. I'm still adding a bit of blue and a bit of light, and mucking around with some different colours. So this area here is quite light, isn't it, on the beak? And then down through there. I think that's what's nice about pastels too, is you can just keep sort of trying things until you get it right, or until you're happy with what you've got. There's so much room for error, I'm going to say. or improvement. Okay, so I'm going to switch off the recording in a minute and we'll have a look and see what everybody's painted. Hope you've had a lovely, lovely time. I thoroughly enjoyed doing this, guy. And yeah, it's been a bunch of fun. If you would like to do any more videos or classes, please head over to my website. There's a bunch of them there that you are welcome to purchase and download. But there's unlimited download on them too. So if you purchase it, there's no expiry date or anything like that. So they're valid forever and they're not going anywhere. So yeah, even if you get one today and do it next year, doesn't matter. It'll still be there ready for you. So thanks for coming. Give me some feedback. I'd love to see what you've painted today.